Hey guys, Dr. K here. How do you feed babies to get them to be the healthiest eaters possible down the road? This is a conversation that keeps coming up in the clinic, and I figured I'd share with you what I share with our families. And I'll say this. This was a conversation that 8 years ago when it started, I was like, maybe I'm just kind of pulling stuff out of my fill in the blank. And, who knows if any of this is true. Until now, we have kids in the practice who are 4, 5, 6. We've got some 8-year-olds that are probably the healthiest eaters, healthier than most adults in what they eat. And this is all a tribute to the hard work that the parents have put in. And, like I tell the parents, I just give you a piece of information. You're the one that does all the hard work. So I hope that this information can help you, especially you families who have little babies and kids under, let's say, a year and a half, 2 years, because after that, the kids have already decided what they want to eat and don't want to eat. And you can still influence them. You can still sway their preferences, but it's harder and harder as they get older. Whereas if you've got a little baby, let's say 4 to 6 months of age until a year and a half of age, you basically have the opportunity to mold their palate. And that's really what I tell families, that food introduction is basically information. You're educating your child on what food is. Now, when I was in residency, this is 15 years ago, I was told that rice cereal and puffs and these kinds of foods are really what we should feed kids because rice cereal has iron, except they didn't tell me that the iron was fortified. So rice actually doesn't have iron, but you're basically giving a kid iron supplement through rice cereal. And, as I started looking at this, I'm like, wait, that makes no sense. Because puffs are what? Basically, it's carbs that just melt in a kid's mouth. Rice cereal has no texture to it. So essentially, we're telling kids that, puffs and cereal are the foods that you should gravitate to. And then when you look at kids that want to eat chicken nuggets and mac and cheese and a handful of other things, and they're more and more picky, and presuming they don't have a tongue tie, that is actually based on the misinformation that we have given a lot of families. When I started looking at what the hell should I tell our families, I started looking in the naturopathic world. And, the naturopaths have been at this for a long, long time. And they actually had this conversation of, well, why don't you just introduce foods that are rich in iron, like spinach and chard and kale and all of these dark green leafy vegetables. And, I started thinking about that. And then I started also thinking about some of the concepts that Diane Barr shares in terms of what do you feed kids to get them to really know how to eat? Because when you think about it, like eating, even though we think it just happens, it is actually a very complex process that is informed. And this is the part that I really want you guys to understand. Eating in a child is informed, it is educated, it is molded based on the information through the foods that we give the child. And this is something that if you don't pay attention to anything else, this is the part that I want you to really drill into your head. Food is information, and it's not just information for the gut. It's not just nutritional information. The texture of the foods, the flavor of the foods, the complexity of the foods are actually information that then help mold a child's palate down the road. So we've got some kiddos in the practice when they were 3 or 4, back before coronavirus, the parents would take them to birthday parties, and these kids would literally go up to the bar or the food bar and would look at the cupcakes in these foods and would literally touch the cupcake and just kind of poke at it, put the frosting in their mouth, and literally walk away and start eating broccoli and carrots. And even with my own daughter, like in looking at her, like she likes sweets. And I mean, there's no kid that doesn't, but she'll eat like half a muffin and then start eating other foods. And that's because we have informed her. These parents have informed their kids like, hey, real food is not cupcakes. Real food is not pizza. Not that they can't eat pizza. Real food are vegetables. Real food is fish. Real food is this stuff. We have families that take their 4-year-olds to sushi and the kids are eating legit sushi. And part of why I keep posting these videos of what we feed our little guy, the salmon roe, last time we were feeding him salmon belly, these are foods that help inform his palate. So he actually is starting to think like, oh, salmon roe is good. Fish eggs are good. We have families that, they're getting fancier. They're giving their kids like black caviar or these exotic foods, which are fantastic. Because you know what? If a kid comes to love caviar, guess what else they're going to love? They're going to love all kinds of foods. So what do? what I tell parents is start off with the nasty vegetables. Give your kid the most bitter, strong tasting vegetables, because a baby doesn't know any different, right? Babies have no idea what food is. So food is what you tell them it is. And if kids come to like purees of vegetables that aren't super tasty initially, and then from there you add bone broth or other things to make it a little bit more flavorful. And then you bring in other proteins such as fish. And like with my daughter, by the time I think she was like 8 months old, 7 months old, she was eating sardines at least once a week. And even to this day, she thinks sardines are delicious. But we have mistaken that, you know what, kids need to be eating puffs. Kids need to be eating these vegetable pouches, which are actually not vegetables, they're primarily fruits. And for those of you that haven't seen, there's now more and more data coming out that a lot of these processed canned foods actually have a bunch of arsenic and metals in them, which make them one more reason not to be desired. But you know, when you give your kid these vegetable pouches, what are you telling them? You're telling them, hey, you know, food needs to be sweet. Because when you look at most of these, you know, quote unquote vegetable pouches, what's the first ingredient? Apples and pears and other sweet fruits. And there's nothing wrong with fruits. There's nothing wrong with giving your kids these things. But if you stand back and ask yourself every time, what information am I giving my kid through the foods that I'm feeding them? And what am I telling them in terms of what food is? And if you just look at food as information, not just for the gut, but for the palate, it starts creating a different mindset of what foods should kids eat? What foods do you want to give your kid? And what foods do you want to introduce to the baby early on? And, you know, there are plenty of babies that by 5-6 months of age are ready to eat. And there's no reason to say that by 7-8 months they can't be eating really complex textures of foods. Now, obviously we need to be mindful of choking hazards, but think about like the slimy texture of okra. Think about the slimy, weird texture of fish, including the strong taste of sardines. We have families that are feeding their kids anchovies, and the kids love the anchovies. Yeah, they're salty, and you shouldn't give them every day, that kind of salty stuff, but the benefits of a kid loving sardines and anchovies far outweighs the salt content that's there. So stand back and ask yourself, you know, especially as a parent of a young kid, what information do I want to give my kid about the foods that I'm feeding them? And through that, what kind of foods do you want them to eat? You know, the sky's the limit. The sky's the limit. Obviously, we have to be careful about, you know, like really poor quality raw seafood because it could be contaminated. But high quality sushi should not be contaminated. Maybe shellfish, you know, like mollusks, those kinds of things, maybe not to give to a young infant. But outside of that, like high quality fish, salmon roe, those kinds of things, the risk of contamination is really low. So I hope this helps. And really, it's not about the nitty-gritty details. It's really about this concept of what information do we want to give little kids? And through that information, what do we want to inform them of what food is down the road? And if you start that process early and you stay with it, you may be amazed in terms of what your kid is willing to eat when they're 3 or 4, and ultimately what kind of an eater they become down the road. There is no absolute rule that all kids need to be picky. There's no absolute rule that all kids only want to eat pizza and chicken nuggets. That is what happens when we inform them that certain foods are just puffs and this and that. But we can also create a totally different possibility and opportunity for kids based on the early education. So I hope this helps. Cheers to a happy and healthy, beautiful day. And hopefully this message helps at least some of you with younger kids so that they can develop, you know, complex, beautiful palates by the time they're 3 or 4 years of age, and that stays with them with super healthy eating all the way through their life, which ultimately becomes, you know, the foundation of their health. Thanks for watching. This is Dr. K.